Blood on the snow, a dying royal guard at the door, when a peasant girl with nothing to her name took in the hunted infant of the Alpha King, she signed her own death warrant. But the usurpers didn't know the terrifying ancient power sleeping in her veins was about to wake. The year was 1432, and the kingdom of Oakhaven was drowning in the most brutal winter it had seen in a century. For Alice Miller, a 19-year-old herbalist living on the fringes of the Silverpine territory, survival was measured in firewood and dried roots. She was no one of consequence, a simple girl whose parents had succumbed to the winter fever years ago, leaving her a secluded cabin and a staggering amount of debt to the local magistrate. Oakhaven was a realm ruled by wolves, lycanthropes of noble bloodlines, who governed the human populace. The Alpha King, Aldrich Halloway, was known as a stern but just ruler, a man who kept the peace between the shifting nobility and the human peasantry. But peace in a kingdom of predators is a fragile, fleeting thing. On the eve of the winter solstice, the wind howled like a wounded beast around Alice's meagre home. She was huddled near the hearth, boiling a potent mixture of lavender and dried wolfsbane to keep the winter pests away, when the heavy oak door shuddered under a frantic, rhythmic pounding. Alice froze. Out here, miles from the village of Bryn, visitors in the dead of night meant only one of two things: thieves or the King's Guard collecting taxes. She picked up a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, her heart hammering against her ribs, and unlatched the door. The heavy wood swung open to reveal a nightmare. A man, broad-shouldered and wearing the ruined, blood-soaked armour of the Alpha King's elite guard, collapsed onto her floorboards. The copper scent of fresh blood immediately overwhelmed the fragrance of her herbs. He was gasping, clutching a heavy, fur-wrapped bundle to his chest. Alice dropped the poker, falling to her knees beside him. "Sir, you're dying," she whispered, her hands hovering over the massive lacerations across his chest. These were not sword wounds. They were the ragged, devastating tears of a rival werewolf's claws, laced with silver dust that sizzled and blackened the edges of his flesh. The king. The man choked out, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. His name plate, battered and scarred, read Gregor, Lord Roderick of House Ashdown. Treason. A massacre at the summit. The king fell, but the heir. The boy. Gregor's trembling hands pushed the fur bundle toward Alice. The furs parted slightly, revealing the sleeping face of an infant, no more than 6 months old. The child had a mop of raven hair, and even in sleep, an aura of raw, undeniable energy. "You must take him," Gregor pleaded, his grip suddenly tight on Elise's thin wrist. "Roderick's hunters, they are tracking my blood." "If they find the prince, the Halloway bloodline ends tonight. Hide him, protect him." "Me?" Alice recoiled, terror seizing her throat. "I am a peasant. I have no money, no weapons. If they find a royal pup here, they will string me up from the weeping willow in the square." "Please," Gregor whispered, the light fading from his amber eyes. For Oakhaven. Before Alice could argue further, Gregor's chest stopped moving. He was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her spine. From the distance, carried on the howling wind, she heard the unmistakable sound of massive paws tearing through the snow, accompanied by the deep, guttural shouts of men, Roderick's hunters. Alice had only seconds. She grabbed the infant, who stirred but miraculously did not cry, and rushed to the back of her cabin. She pulled up a heavy rug, revealing the wooden trapdoor to her root cellar. It was damp, freezing, and smelled of earth and potatoes. She scrambled down the ladder, placed the baby in a woven basket lined with moss, and pressed a tiny cloth dipped in honey to the boy's lips to keep him quiet. "Hush now, little one," she breathed, her hands shaking violently. Not a sound. She scrambled back up, threw the rug over the trapdoor, and rushed to the hearth. She grabbed a massive handful of dried wolfsbane and threw it directly onto the fire. The herb was highly toxic to werewolves, and the thick, acrid smoke instantly filled the cabin, masking the scent of Gregor's blood and the infant's royal musk. The door was kicked entirely off its hinges. 3 men stepped into the cabin, snow swirling around their heavy cloaks. The leader, Captain Gideon, had eyes the colour of dirty ice and a sneer that promised violence. He surveyed the dead guard on the floor, then locked his gaze on Alice, who stood trembling by the fireplace, coughing from the smoke. Gideon covered his nose, his eyes watering from the potent wolfsbane. "A clever little witch, aren't you, trying to blind our senses?" He stepped over Gregor's body and approached Alice, grabbing her by the chin. "Where is the bundle he was carrying?" "I don't know what you mean, my lord," Alice choked out, tears of genuine fear streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. "He just fell through my door and died. I was boiling herbs for a fever." "Please, I have nothing of value." Gideon's men tore the cabin apart. They smashed her pottery, ripped apart her thin mattress, and kicked over her meagre supplies. Alice prayed to every god she knew that the baby wouldn't cry. The seconds stretched into agonizing hours. Every time a boot stepped near the rug hiding the cellar, Alice felt her soul leave her body. The guard bled out running. One of the men grunted from the corner. "The pup might have been dropped in the ravine a mile back. This girl is a rat. She knows nothing." Gideon released Alice's face with a disgusted shove, sending her crashing into the stone hearth. "Burn the guard's body outside," he ordered. He looked down at Alice one last time. "If I find out you lied to me, little bird, I will come back and eat your heart while it still beats." When they finally left, taking Gregor's body with them, Alice stayed on the floor for a long time, listening to the crunch of their boots fading into the storm. When she was sure they were gone, she crawled to the rug, threw it aside, and opened the trapdoor. The baby was awake. He looked up at her with striking, luminescent golden eyes, the undeniable mark of an alpha. Alice pulled him into her arms, burying her face in his soft fur-wrapped chest, and wept. She was entirely alone, trapped in a kingdom ruled by a usurper, holding the most hunted child in the world. She named him Leo, and that night the poor herbalist became a mother to a king. 4 years passed under the tyrannical rule of Roderick Ashdown. The usurper had crowned himself Alpha King, plunging Oakhaven into an era of starvation and fear. Taxes were brutal, and any human or wolf suspected of loyalty to the fallen Halloway line was executed in the public squares. Alice had managed to survive by moving to a small run-down cottage closer to the village of Bryn, taking on double shifts at Mrs. Higgins' bakery by day and mending clothes for Thomas the blacksmith by night. She needed every copper she could get, not just for food, but for the exorbitant amounts of red meat Leo required. Raising a werewolf child was difficult. Raising a royal alpha was nearly impossible. At 4 years old, Leo looked and acted like a human boy of 7. He was fiercely protective, endlessly energetic, and growing stronger by the day. But it was his predatory nature that terrified Alice. When he was upset, his eyes would flash that brilliant, dangerous gold. He possessed a strength that could snap a wooden chair leg in half, and his hearing was so sharp he could hear the village guards whispering a block away. Alice lived in a constant state of high alert, drilling it into the boy's head that he must never show his strength, never get angry, and always keep his eyes cast down. "Why, Mamma?" Leo asked one evening, sitting on the floor as Alice patched his worn trousers. "Why do I have to hide from the soldiers? Thomas the blacksmith said the soldiers are supposed to protect us." Alice sighed, smoothing down his thick raven hair. "Because, my sweet boy, not all soldiers serve good men, and you are special. Some men fear what is special. Promise me, Leo. If the soldiers ever speak to you, you run to me. You never fight back. I promise." Leo muttered, though his little jaw clenched with an instinctual defiance that made Alice's heart ache. Whispers had begun to circulate through the village taverns, dangerous, treasonous whispers. They said Aldrich Halloway, the true Alpha King, had not died in the massacre. Rumour had it that Aldrich was severely wounded, forced into hiding in the desolate northern wastes, and was slowly rebuilding an army of loyalists. Alice didn't dare hope. Hope was a dangerous thing for a woman trying to keep a secret. The turning point came on a bitter afternoon in late January. Roderick's tax collectors had arrived in Bryn early, led by Sir Reginald, a massive, scarred werewolf known for his cruelty and his short temper. They were going door to door, demanding an extra tithe of winter grain and coin. Alice was outside her cottage, frantically trying to hide a small sack of potatoes beneath the floorboards of her porch, when Reginald and his thugs kicked open her front gate. "Well, well, the pretty little baker's assistant," Reginald sneered, his breath pluming in the freezing air. He gestured to the 2 guards flanking him. "Tithe is due, girl. 3 silvers. 3 silvers? Alice gasped, standing up. "My lord, the tax was only 1 silver last month. I don't have 3. I barely have enough to feed my son." "Then you will pay in blood, or we will take whatever we please inside," Reginald growled, stepping toward her. From the doorway of the cottage, Leo emerged. He had been told to stay inside, but seeing the massive man threatening his mother triggered something ancient and primal in the boy's blood. "Leave her alone!" Leo shouted, stepping in front of Alice. Reginald laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "A brave little rat. Move aside, boy, before I break your legs." He reached out and shoved Leo hard. A human child would have gone flying, crying in pain. Leo, however, planted his feet. He slid backward in the dirt, but did not fall. He looked up, and a low, guttural growl ripped from his small throat. For a split second, his eyes flared a blinding, undeniable gold, and his fingernails elongated into sharp, dark claws. Reginald froze. The laughter died in his throat. He leaned down, staring into the boy's eyes, his own nostrils flaring as he took in the boy's scent, a scent Alice hadn't had time to mask today. "By the blood of the moon," Reginald whispered, taking a step back in shock. "That scent, those eyes, you are a Halloway." A wicked, greedy smile spread across the scarred soldier's face. "The lost pup. Roderick will pay me a mountain of gold for your head." Reginald drew a long, serrated silver blade from his hip. "Kill the woman," he ordered his men. "I'll take the boy's head myself." "No!" Alice screamed. Instinct took over. She had no weapon, no combat training, nothing but the fierce, blinding love of a mother protecting her child. As Reginald lunged at Leo, Alice threw her body directly in the path of the silver blade. She expected the cold bite of steel. She expected death. Instead, a sensation like liquid fire erupted from her chest. It started as a warmth in her heart, spreading violently through her veins, rushing to her fingertips and her eyes. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. As Reginald's blade touched the fabric of Alice's dress, a shockwave of blinding, ethereal white light exploded from Alice's body. It wasn't magic born of spells or incantations. It was something older, something the werewolf history books called a myth. She was a lumina, a moon singer, a human born with the dormant essence of the moon goddess, destined to be a conduit of absolute power, capable of commanding even the strongest alphas. The power only awakened to protect the royal bloodline. The blast of pure lunar energy hit Reginald and his men with the force of a falling mountain. They were thrown violently backward, flying through the air and crashing through the wooden fence of the yard. The silver sword shattered into a dozen pieces. Alice stood breathing heavily, hovering over Leo. Her hands were glowing with a soft, radiant white mist. Her brown eyes had shifted to a stunning, luminescent silver. She looked down at her hands in absolute shock. Reginald groaned, struggling to get up from the splintered wood, staring at Alice with a mixture of terror and awe. "A moon singer," he choked out, clutching a broken rib. "It's impossible." "Run," Alice's voice echoed, though it sounded layered, echoing with a strange, commanding frequency that forced Reginald to press his hands to his ears. "If you ever come near my son again, I will turn you to ash." The soldiers didn't hesitate. Terrified of the glowing woman, they scrambled to their feet and sprinted toward the village to sound the alarm. Alice fell to her knees in the snow, the silver light fading from her eyes, leaving her gasping and exhausted. Leo rushed into her arms, burying his face in her neck. "Mama, what was that?" he cried. "I don't know, Leo. I don't know," Alice whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the broken fence and the melted snow around them. She knew one thing with absolute certainty. Bryn was no longer safe. Roderick Ashdown would send an army when he heard of this. She looked toward the desolate, frozen peaks of the northern wastes. If the rumours were true, Aldrich Halloway was out there. "Pack your warm coat, Leo," Alice said, her voice shaking but resolute as she pulled the boy to his feet. "We have to find your father." The journey into the northern wastes was a descent into a freezing hell. For 3 weeks, Elise and little Leo trudged through waist-deep snow, surviving on dried rations and the faint residual warmth of Elise's newly awakened magic. Whenever the boy shivered, Elise would press her palm to his chest, willing a tiny spark of the moon singer's light to heat his blood. But the magic was volatile, draining her physical strength with every use. They were not alone in the wilderness. Roderick had dispatched his most ruthless blood tracker, a notorious mercenary commander named Lord William Hastings. Hastings was a man of real historical cruelty, known across the Western Territories for hunting down rogue wolves and peeling their pelts for coin. He had no loyalty to Roderick, only to the gold Roderick promised for the heads of the woman and the boy. On the 21st day, as a brutal blizzard began to howl through the jagged peaks, Hastings and his pack of mercenary hounds cornered them. Alice dragged Leo into the hollowed-out roots of a massive dead pine tree, her breath frosting in the air. She could hear the crunch of heavy boots and the sniffling of the massive, mutated hounds. "Spread out!" Hastings's voice boomed over the wind, harsh and grating. "The scent is fresh. Bring me the boy alive, but you can gut the witch." Alice pulled Leo tight against her chest. She closed her eyes and tried to summon the blinding white light that had saved them in Bryn, but her body was too starved, too exhausted. Only a pathetic flickering spark manifested at her fingertips before dying out. "Mama, I can fight," Leo whispered, his little hands curling into fists, his eyes flashing gold. "No, Leo, you stay behind me," Alice commanded, forcing herself to stand. She stepped out of the hollow tree, putting her frail body between her son and the approaching mercenaries. William Hastings emerged through the snow, flanked by 4 massive, snarling hounds. He smiled, drawing a long, silver-plated broadsword. "A peasant girl playing martyr," he sneered. "How tragically boring." He lunged. Alice squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the end. But the blow never landed. A deafening, earth-shattering roar echoed through the canyon, a sound so primal and terrifying that even Hastings's mutated hounds whimpered and dropped to their bellies. From the cliffs above, a massive shape descended like a falling boulder. It was a wolf, but not a normal lycanthrope. This beast was the size of a warhorse, its fur a striking midnight black, scarred with vicious, jagged silver burns across its snout and shoulder. The giant wolf landed directly on top of Hastings's vanguard, crushing 2 mercenaries instantly. Hastings swung his silver sword, but the black wolf was impossibly fast. With a vicious snap of its jaws, the broadsword was shattered, and Hastings was sent flying into the snowbank, screaming in terror. Within seconds, the remaining mercenaries scattered, fleeing into the blizzard rather than facing the monster. The giant black wolf stood panting, its breath pluming like dragon smoke. Slowly, it turned its golden eyes toward Alice and the trembling boy behind her. As Alice watched, the beast's bones cracked and shifted, fur receding into flesh, until a man stood before them in the freezing snow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and weathered by years of brutal survival. A rugged beard framed a jawline that could cut glass, and his eyes, those identical, piercing golden eyes, locked onto Leo. It was Aldrich Halloway, the Alpha King. Gregor. Aldrich murmured, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate in Alice's chest. Gregor sent a message before he died, said he found a human. I thought it was a lie, a trap. He fell to his knees in the snow, ignoring the freezing temperature, and held out his hands. Leo, acting on pure, undeniable instinct, stepped around Alice and walked toward the man. When Aldrich wrapped his arms around the boy, burying his face in Leo's dark hair, a heavy sob racked the king's massive frame. Alice watched them, overwhelming relief washing over her. She had done it. She had kept her promise. The adrenaline that had kept her going for 4 years suddenly evaporated. "You protected him," Aldrich said, looking up at Elise with a reverence she had never seen in a royal's eyes. "A human girl. How did you survive? How did you—" Before Aldrich could finish his sentence, Alice's eyes rolled back into her head. The exhaustion claimed her, and she collapsed face first into the unforgiving snow. When Alice awoke, she was warm. She found herself lying on a bed of thick, luxurious pelts inside a massive stone cavern, a roaring fire crackling nearby. As she sat up, she noticed the faint, glowing silver veins on her hands had stabilized. "Drink this," a deep voice commanded softly. Aldrich stepped into the firelight, handing her a wooden cup of hot, spiced broth. He was dressed in heavy leathers and a fur cloak, his regal bearing undeniable even in exile. Alice took the cup, her hands brushing his, and a sudden electric jolt sparked between them. Aldrich gasped, pulling his hand back, his golden eyes widening in shock. "The legends are true," Aldrich whispered, staring at her. "You are a Lumina, and you are my fated." Alice blushed deeply, pulling the furs up to her chin. "I am just Alice, my king, a baker's assistant." "You are the mother of my son," Aldrich corrected, his voice thick with emotion. He sat on the edge of the cot. "For 4 years I have lived with ghosts, rebuilding a broken army, believing my bloodline was dead. You gave me back my soul, Alice, and your power. It is the key to reclaiming Oakhaven." Their quiet moment was violently interrupted by a horn blast echoing through the cavern. A scout rushed in, bleeding from a shoulder wound. "My king, it's an ambush. Roderick found our camp. He brought Lord Richard Neville's heavy cavalry and 100 silver-armed guards. They are slaughtering our sentries." Aldrich's expression hardened into a mask of pure, lethal fury. "Protect the boy," he told Elise. "I will end Roderick tonight, or I will die trying." Aldrich shifted into his monstrous wolf form and charged out of the cavern, followed by the roars of his loyalist rebels. Alice scrambled out of bed, finding Leo safely hidden behind a pile of crates by a healer. Alice rushed to the cavern entrance and looked down at the valley below. It was a massacre. Roderick's forces heavily outnumbered Aldrich's rebels. Roderick himself, a massive, foul-looking russet wolf, was tearing through Aldrich's men, heading straight for the Alpha King. "I cannot hide any more," Alice thought. "I am done hiding." She stepped out of the cavern and onto the snowy cliff, overlooking the battlefield. She closed her eyes and reached deep into her chest, not for fear, but for the fierce, unyielding love she held for Leo, and the sudden, undeniable pull she felt toward Aldrich. "Goddess, "Hear me," Alice whispered. Her eyes snapped open, glowing a blinding, radiant silver. A pillar of pure moonlight crashed down from the storm clouds above, enveloping Alice. The battlefield below fell completely silent as every soldier, human and wolf alike, looked up in absolute awe. Alice raised her hands, and the lunar energy rippled out from her body in a massive sweeping shockwave. When the light washed over Roderick's men, they screamed, their silver weapons turning red hot and burning their hands, forcing them to drop their swords and shields. But when the light touched Aldrich and his rebels, their wounds instantly closed. Their fatigue vanished, replaced by the furious, unmatched strength of the moon goddess herself. "The Lumina!" Aldrich roared, his voice echoing with newfound godlike power. "For Oakhaven!" The tide turned in an instant. Empowered by Alice's magic, the rebels decimated the usurper's army. Aldrich and Roderick clashed in the centre of the valley, a blur of fangs and claws. But Roderick was sluggish, terrified by the blinding light of the moonsinger. In a desperate, cowardly move, Roderick shifted back to his human form, pulling a concealed silver dagger, intending to throw it not at Aldrich, but at Alice on the cliff. Alice didn't flinch. She simply pointed a glowing finger at Roderick. A bolt of solid lunar light shot from her hand, striking the dagger and shattering it into dust. Distracted and disarmed, Roderick never saw Aldrich lunge. The true Alpha King's jaws closed around the usurper's throat. With one sickening crunch, the reign of Roderick Ashdown was over. The surviving enemy soldiers immediately dropped to their knees, baring their necks in submission to the true king. The battle was won. Alice slowly lowered her hands, the silver light fading from her eyes as she sank to her knees, breathless but triumphant. Minutes later, Aldrich, back in his human form and covered in the blood of his enemies, climbed the cliffside. He didn't say a word. He simply fell to his knees in the snow in front of Alice, taking her small, scarred hands in his massive ones, and pressed a tender, lingering kiss to her knuckles. Leo ran out of the cavern, throwing his arms around both of them, tackling them into a laughing, crying heap in the snow. A month later, the gates of Oakhaven's capital swung open. The kingdom cheered as Aldrich Halloway took his rightful place on the throne, but he did not sit alone. Beside him, crowned in silver, and holding the hand of the young Prince Leo, sat Queen Alice. The peasant girl, who had hidden a king in a root cellar, had become the most powerful Lumina in history, ushering in a new golden age where humans and wolves lived in perfect, unbreakable harmony. What would you have done? Alice risked everything to protect a child she didn't know, and in return she found a family, a throne, and a power that changed history forever. Sometimes the greatest magic isn't born from spells. It's born from a mother's fierce love. If you loved Alice's incredible journey from a hunted peasant to a legendary queen, hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more epic werewolf romance dramas.